Welcome back to Truth Be Told. This episode is a special one. We recorded it live at the International Association of Interviewers Elite Training Days Conference. You're going to hear from Jeff Deskovic, who spent 16 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and Jia Rizvi, the journalist and filmmaker behind 16 Years, a powerful documentary that tells Jeff's story. Together, we're going to explore how communication, interrogation, and perspective can be the difference between truth and tragedy, and how we can all do better when it comes to listening, questioning, and understanding. If you missed out on the live show, check out certifiedinterviewer.com for more information. Let's get right to the conversation. This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to our first ever live recording of the Truth Be Told podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited about who we've got here today. And I know Dave just kind of introduced the three of us. This is a lot less about me in the podcast and more about these two, and specifically about Jeff. And so I'm going to give you some insight into what we're going to talk about. But the first thing I want to do is just really thank both Jia and Jeff for coming today. And I don't want us to lose sight of what we're talking about. So Jeff is going to share his experience of being wrongfully convicted, which can be a traumatic experience, obviously, to reshare, no matter how many years it's been, no matter how many times you've told the story. And so I just want to keep that in mind as we're asking questions and we're kind of talking through this life experience, and really appreciate Jeff reliving that, and really in the purpose of educating all of us and spreading that message. So thanks, Jeff, for doing that. And thanks to Jia for giving Jeff and others like Jeff a voice through her filmmaking. That's what's really exciting to me, is we've got this kind of combination of communication here, of how communication failures can lead to wrongful convictions, but then how the right communication, like what Gia's put together, can help improve the criminal justice system and educate us as investigators. And we're going to get a glimpse into a documentary that has not been fully released yet, which is really exciting, and Jia and Jeff's work. So before we get into the content, and before I have the two of you kind of talk about the experience, we're going to play the trailer for the film, which will set kind of the foundation of what we're going to talk about today.
There weren't a ton of murders and murder trials in Westchester County.
When they first announced she was missing, I just knew that there was a situation going on. There was a problem and it was serious.
These two men got out of a car. They had on long trench coats. They would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime.
Jeff was allegedly absent from school during the time of the rape and murder.
The energy in the school was mixed because Jeff was seen crying hysterically at the funeral.
They interrogated him for over 8 hours. They did not give him food.
What is your opinion as to why the guy would even be concerned with making it harder for anybody to find her? What happens then? How will she be killed?
And I found myself in the back room of the station. They start by asking me if there's anything I know about the woods up where she was found.
McIntyre and Levine engaged in a pattern of coercively interrogating high school students.
They have an ethical obligation to seek the truth.
They started to become implicative. You write Angela letters. No, I don't.
PPD personnel canvassed the area, collecting and documenting a torn note found underneath Angela's body, a white bra left along a dirt path.
My opinion is indication of guilt. Well, why isn't his?
What did she do that put you into that rage?
Nothing at all.
I almost couldn't believe what my senses and what my mind was telling me. I was charged with murder and rape.
So, and I also want to mention, we're going to learn a little bit about Jeff and his current role, but pretty fascinating. Jeff's now an attorney and has worked to free, how many people are we at?
15.
15 other people who have been wrongfully convicted. So just what an incredible story. But I'm going to start a question with Jia. I know a lot of us, maybe true crime junkies in here that watch Netflix and Dateline and 60 Minutes and all these things. It's always fascinating to me, how do they pick the story? And how do they interact with the people in that story, who's not just a story, these are real life experiences. So Jia, what got you first started into this topic, and then why Jeff's story? What struck you there?
So I listened to the Serial podcast like everyone else in the world in 2014. And as I listened to it, I was incensed by Adnan's story and started to advocate for his innocence through a fundraiser that I did. And I created these free Adnan shirts, and I donated the funds from those, and they went viral all over the world. And while those things were great, they didn't move the needle enough. Like, it raised a few $1,000s for him, and that was it. And I realized quickly that that wasn't really helping him in any meaningful way. And while I was fundraising, I also noticed that people just weren't that receptive to it. They didn't want to be, convinced to get behind a cause. And wrongful convictions are something that we don't see every day. If you're not in that world, you can ignore it. You can kind of think it doesn't exist. It's not like homelessness or, animals in an animal shelter or anything like that. And so I quickly realized that people don't think this is a real problem in the country. And it just happened to be that I was at Adnan's post-conviction hearing when Making a Murder and Jinx were huge on television. And when I saw the corruption in Adnan's case, I was on the train ride home kind of racking my brain thinking what more I could do. And I thought, films really get people's attention, and films get people to care because they watch these in their own time and they get convinced of someone's innocence on their own time. It's not someone trying to convince them. And so I enrolled into film school and started filming. When I had hosted the fundraiser for Adnan, a friend of mine said, I know somebody who has almost the same story as Adnan. His name is Jeff. Do you want to meet him? And I said, yes. And she introduced me to Jeff, and I couldn't even believe how similar their stories were. It was almost identical, like two high school kids, a girl in their school gets murdered, they get accused of it, they were innocent, they get convicted. And so Jeff graciously spoke at that fundraiser, and then we became friends. And when I went to film school, he was the only person I knew in real life who had this lived experience. So he was the one I called and said, can I film you? Can I follow you around? And he said yes.
Well, so Jeff, I want to learn about that, because I'm sure you had plenty of people, and I've seen this at, we go to the Innocence Conference and we see a lot of filmmakers and media and reporters that always want to interview people with these experiences. So I'm sure you have to be skeptical of that. What was that interaction like with Jia?
I'm always skeptical, but that's translated into me saying yes to everybody. And then I figured, all right, well, I'm probably never going to hear from them again. And if they do, I'll take it from there. And if it turns out that they really are going to do something, well, I want to get the story out. So, that's fine. So, it was the same way with Jia, even though I met her at the event that I spoke at, and then we bumped into each other at a much larger fundraising event for Adnan in Washington D.C. that I was the keynote speaker at. And then she mentioned, hey, would you be willing to be a subject of a documentary that I'm making? And I said yes, and I just thought, well, I'm never going to hear from her again, except that a couple of weeks later I did. And she wanted to set up a time to come to my house, and she was going to bring a coworker and, start filming. So I thought, all right, well, I guess this is going to be a little bit different. I guess she really is going to come and film. But when she walked through the door, a colleague and, 2 handbags and her colleague with all these, contraptions associated with making a movie, I'm like, wow, I guess this is going to be really serious. And it was. But just knowing Jia, as opposed to if it was just somebody either clear blue, albeit over those, 2 interactions, I think made it a lot easier for me just to open up to her, even though in general I am fairly transparent.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about Jeff. Every time I talk to Jeff about, are we going to share, is it okay to share your story? And there's some clips we're going to watch here in a few minutes that are emotional and vulnerable, and Jeff reliving some experiences. And I asked Jia, is Jeff going to be okay to share this? And what's your typical response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I say that. But look, to add a little bit more to it, I mean, I do confirm, yes, it is a little bit traumatic for me. It is a little bit difficult. At the same time, the difference that it makes, just as far as, raising awareness about wrongful conviction, about false confessions, about incorrect ways of interrogating, about my story and about my nonprofit. I mean, all those things, far outweigh the negative. So, let's do it.
That's perfect. Well, that's going to kind of set us off into this first clip. We're going to play, I think I got 4 clips from the film. And this first one, you're going to learn a little bit about Jeff's first interaction with law enforcement. And what that experience was like, and then I'll kind of dive into that with both of you afterwards.
It was a school day, and I was walking. I lived in an apartment on Brown Street in Peekskill, and I lived right across the street from the high school. So the police were able to figure out relatively easily which street I would likely be taking and going to the high schools. These two men got out of a car, and they had on long trench coats, and they called my name, and I paused and stopped and said, yeah, who are you? And they told me that they were the Peekskill detectives. They would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. The career I wanted to have when I grew up was to be a cop. So this unexpected early opportunity to do this quasi-police work was, made me feel good. I didn't actually realize that I was arrested until later on I was in the police station. They had given me some pizza to eat. And periodically I would be interrupted by this officer who was doing these various processing techniques. And eventually he put this ink on my hands in order to do the fingerprints. And I remember that got me angry because I'm eating pizza, so I saw one of these detectives that was there, and I said, what is he doing? I've got ink on my hands now, I'm trying to eat pizza. And so he said to me, well, he has the right to do that. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He's got the right to do that. And so he told me, oh, you are being charged with a crime. And it was at that moment that I realized what happened.
I think that perspective is fascinating, right? Especially, how old were you at the time, Jeff?
16.
So 16, all of you were 16 at some point. But think about either yourself or you have kids or family members, especially at that age. And so, Jeff, can you just expand on that, on what that experience was like, what your mindset was, where you feel like you're there as a support of the investigation versus a target of the investigation?
Well, I felt like I had been betrayed, because at that point it was more than I was just been the target. I mean, I had been arrested. I mean, that's the Rubicon for them. I remember feeling a combination of being angry at being betrayed, but that was a strong feeling. But a stronger feeling than that was a feeling of fear and wondering what's gonna happen next.
Gee, I'm curious, are you sitting across from Jeff during this clip when you're asking him about the experience?
Yes.
So how did you decide? You're not in a lot of this. So as a film, I'm always curious when people are doing the interviews and these documentaries, where are you and what's the choice to keep your voice out of the film?
So I'm right next to Jeff in all of them. There's other scenes you'll see later in a car. I'm sitting next to him. Absolutely, I never want to be in it ever. You will see me for a little second in a clip in the future, like in a little while, and I hated it. I wanted to take myself out of it because it's not my story. It's Jeff's story. It has nothing to do with me. I should be a fly on the wall.
Jeff, this concept of you're not realizing you're under arrest, but you talk about kind of that transition where you started to feel betrayed. Do you remember at that moment when you felt like this is no longer a trusting environment? Yeah,
when I became aware that I was arrested, which was at the moment that the detective, told me, well, he has a right to do that. So maybe it's good for me to take a half step back. And after the coerced false confession, I mean, I was given something to eat, and it was time to go back to the police station, but they still hadn't told me that I was, under arrest. I was still laboring under, what the good cop had told me. He came in the room and he said, look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do this any longer. You got to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You could go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So I believed that, and when it was time to leave, they handcuffed me, with my arms behind my back, and I asked, well, what's going on? Why are you handcuffing me? You told me that I wasn't going to be arrested. And the lieutenant just said, oh, it's safety. And he didn't give any further explanation. They adjusted the handcuffs so that my hands would be in the front of me. But that was it. And I think psychologically in that car ride, which was 40 minutes away from Brewster in Putnam County to Peekskill in Westchester, it was just down to me latching on to that false promise he gave me. That's all that I had to hold on to, and I needed to believe that, and so I did. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the interrogation itself and what you see a lot, and Jeff can expand on this. False promises, not even just implied promises, but pretty explicit from what you just shared. And this concept, anybody here ever heard of a dream confession before?
a couple hands up. You get this concept where sometimes a person's interrogated about the same crime over and over and over again. And so it's almost like watching a scary movie and you got nightmares and you keep replaying in your head. And so there's some confessions out there, false confessions, where a person has been interrogated for, how long was yours, Jeff?
Mine was 6.5 to 7 hours.
Okay. And so in these dream confessions, a person has been told over and over again what they allegedly did. And so now they can't stop replaying that in their head. And what the investigators have transitioned that into is, hey, I know you can't stop thinking about this. And the person says, I know I've been dreaming about it. Well, tell me about your dream, right? What's happening in your dream? And so now they're restating what they've been told, which now turns into a confession. And so I want to give you that premise. It's not exactly what happened here, but we're going to see some similarities as we go into Jeff's interrogation.
Deskovic alleges that McIntyre and Levine engaged in a pattern of coercively interrogating high school students.
A lot of students in the high school, and some of them told the police they might want to talk to me because I was quiet and to myself and I didn't really fit in there.
Detective Tom McIntyre, case number 14023-89, January 10th, 1990, time 2100 hours.
John informed officers that Deskovic had been acting, quote, strangely. John reported that Deskovic had admitted to having, quote, problems with the police.
For a few minutes, I'm going to see what the status of that pizza is under it. Okay, Jeff. Knowing girls like you do, girls of that age, what would cause her to want to break up with a guy? How's the pizza?
Around this time, officers were interviewing schoolmates, including Claxton.
All right, you indicated on the left-hand side of the trail, though, the rape point. From there, we went down near the pond, as well as we could in the dark. And you pointed out to our left front the area where you thought the body was covered with the leaves. Is that correct?
Yeah, I pointed to it, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. Again, it's only your opinion. Again, I just want your opinion.
Right.
Why do you think that there's a struggle, a different point where the rape takes place, and then you said that you believe the person that did it then dragged her down and covered her up with leaves? Do you know why you feel that there's more than one point?
Well, I think it really kind of hard to struggle, rape and murder, understand it's travel.
I agree with you. Because you're indicating the path that runs back and forth that the kids use. Yeah, so there's people on that path all the time. The dirt path that you took me on where you said the rape and the body were, now that's much less used. But the point that I'm getting at is I don't understand why you say that the rape happened at this point, and the body's found at this point. What leads you to believe that the guy responsible wouldn't commit the rape and just leave it at that? Why did you use the term he dragged her down and covered her with leaves? Again, I'm asking your opinion. Why do you feel this is what happened? Why do you think she died at the point of the rape and then was dragged to a different point to be covered up? What is your opinion as to why the guy would even be concerned with making it harder for anybody to find her? What happens then? How will she be killed? I know pizza pretty good. I can't get over this. I won't interrupt your pizza, but you've done remarkably well. How do you guess when you were talking to Dave before you said she left the house? About 3:30.
I don't know if that's what medical.
So if she left the house at about 3:30, you're gauging.
Yeah.
I got one question that's really bugged me. I'm hoping you can help me with this one. So the guy presses over her mouth and she suffocates. something. You got me thinking, Jeff. This whole thing, I like your scenario.
I remember he just seemed to be praying, maybe with his mother and grandmother, his eyes closed, and he looked so young. Deskovic himself said, "I didn't do it" at the end, but I didn't believe him. He confessed, and that he seemed to know details that only the killer would know. I didn't know anybody who doubted this. Peekskill teenager Jeffrey Deskovic wept and called his lawyer's name yesterday as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs after a jury convicted him of raping and killing a classmate.
So, a lot to break down here. First, for Jia, when we've talked about this film and some others that she's worked on, and I've compared your work to an investigator, because you're piecing together. If you guys see, how many people worked with you on producing and editing this?
3.
3. So I want you to think about all of the video clips, the pictures, the text that's highlighted. So what does that process look like to compile all that information to tell a story?
Oh my God, that's such a loaded question. It's years and years of work, and it's you know what it is, and I always compare it to this, and I love doing this. It's like putting together pieces of a puzzle. That's exactly what it is. It's taking archival footage and interviews you shot and crime scene footage and photographs and baby photos and, you know, videos with his mom, and putting it all together in a digestible way so an audience can feel his pain and his experience.
So Jeff, in that clip we just listened to, there's a lot of things I know we've talked about to expand on. I want to go back to, they talked about a polygraph. Can you walk me through what that experience was like?
Sure. Well, for context, let me just say that, you know, I didn't know that the polygraphist was law enforcement. He was Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like a civilian. You know, he never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time I was there. I had no attorney present. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But I figured I was there to help the police. So what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. And from there, he put me in a small room, and he gave me countless cups of coffee. I really wasn't a coffee drinker at 16. Seems pretty clear the purpose of giving me the coffee was to get me nervous. And then he wired me up, and he fooled around with the knobs for like a minute and pretended to dial the polygraph in to match my body's biodata. And then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour increased, my fear increased in proportions to the time. I really wasn't used to talking with adult males because my father had never been in my life in any aspect. And he kept that up for, 6.5 to 7 hours. And, towards the end, I guess he was exasperated at that point by not being able to get me to confess. And, he asked me to name my favorite officer. And, I mentioned the name of the cop who had been pretending to be my friend. And then he came in the room and he told me that the other officers were going to harm me, that he had been holding them off, that he said that I couldn't do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he added, look, just tell them what they want to hear. You'll go home. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and nobody else did either, it loomed rather large in my mind. And then there was this push-pull dynamic in play. I mean, on one hand, he had the possibility of harm that he threw in the air. And then on the other, he threw me this false life preserver. And so I made up a story based on the information that had been given me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. I spoke faster than what I could make a story up, even with that info. And so all of it resulted in my, collapsing on the floor, being overwhelmed. And, I was crying uncontrollably. I want to mention that according to the polygraph method that he used, the Arthur method, it has such a high incident rate of producing false confessions that the polygraphist is supposed to audio and or video record. And he didn't do that. In addition, the polygraph literature indicates that the longest anybody should be polygraphed, the outermost limit would be 3.5 hours, and here he more than doubled that up on me. Lastly, I'll add on the polygraph that later on, during the civil litigation, we asked, my civil rights lawyers asked him for his charts so that could be reviewed, and that's when he said, well, the charts were missing and weren't available anymore.
I'll talk about missing evidence as well, because you told me, and the experience I've had and talking to other people who've been wrongfully convicted, it seems like a lot of innocent people also get really unlucky. There's some ill intent and there's some negligence, but there's also just sometimes really bad luck, maybe what this was. But there was a headline in here in the clip that you had in the film that said about a torn bra, or somebody tore the bra off. Can you explain that and then how that maybe impacted what happened later on in the trial?
Sure. I want to add something first about the polygraph. Just in general, polygraph test results are not admissible in court because there's a consensus that it's not scientific and that, frightened innocent people can fail it. The only way it's allowed in is if both sides agree. The defense did not agree, but the trial judge created a backdoor rule. He said, well, because this alleged confession happened while you were being polygraphed, I'm going to allow the polygraphist to testify. So the jury heard the polygraphist repeatedly tell the jury that I lied when I denied committing the crime, but at the same time, my lawyer was banned from asking him questions on the methods that he used to arrive at his opinion. So I want to mention that. The second thing is after the DNA didn't match me, the polygraphist, not being content with having forced a false confession out of me, he falsely attributed a statement to me. He claimed that I said to him that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. But that word was not in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old, and he only came up with that after, that's only in his police reports about the interrogation, after the DNA didn't match me. He didn't say that before. So your question, though, the main question is, the jury asked to see the bra. The prosecution had entered the victim's clothes as evidence, including the bra. And when the jury asked to see that, that was a brief moment for the defense, because that bra intersected with a statement that was coerced out of me, in which I said that I ripped her bra off. So when the jury asked to see the bra, we thought that was good, that they were thinking like we wanted them to think, because there's some bras, the way that they're made, you can't rip it off. And that's when the judge announced that the bra and other clothes had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that the custodians apparently thought it was garbage, so it had been thrown out and it was no longer available. He refused to strike testimony about the bra. He refused to declare a mistrial, and instead he substituted for the bra. He gave the jury a photo which he said you can almost see the bra in it.
The judge?
The judge. So,
Jia, as you've listened to the interrogation 4,000 times probably, and plenty others at this point, I'm curious, from traditionally a non-criminal justice professional, when you first listened to these interrogations, was it obvious to you that there was issues in the way that detectives conducted the conversation? Or what have you learned, I guess, throughout this experience about the interview process?
I mean, yeah, it was so obvious to me. The first time, and actually every time, the pizza comments just get me, because they're so indicative of the fact that he's 16, that he's just too young to understand. The fact that he was annoyed that he's being fingerprinted because he just wanted to eat. It's like, how can somebody that has that train of thought also be held responsible for everything else that was happening to him and the detectives were doing in that 6-week time frame? But yeah, I learned a million things. Like, I should have had a trauma therapist with me, because I'm not equipped to handle everything that comes with these kinds of conversations. But it was very obvious to me, yeah.
Well, I think that's important too. And we talk, I know those of you in the masterclass earlier today talked about kind of handling critical incidents. And we've talked about secondary trauma a lot. As investigators, you're all exposed to that, right? Because you can deal with these incidents all the time. And if they didn't happen to you, you're part of that experience when somebody's retelling their story. So is that something that you have felt from the interviewer's perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've cried more times than I can tell you over Jeff's story in the editing process, rewatching the scenes over and over and over again. It's really, really sad. In the beginning, and you know, I said earlier that Jeff was the only person I knew when I made this film that had this lived experience, which is why I reached out to him. And people used to ask me, do you like working in this field? It's so sad. And I always said, it's really fulfilling because I feel like I'm helping somebody, and I actually love working behind the camera, so it's fun also. And now, 10 years later, it's very, very, very sad and very hard to do, because now I know at least, I think 10 or 12 of my best friends are wrongfully convicted people. I know probably about 45 personally. It's insane.
Jeff, in the clip that we just listened to, actually in both clips, this kind of guise of you're there to help. And then I heard a lot of, how do you think this crime happened? Or what do you think somebody would have done? So obviously at the time, you're probably thinking different than obviously you're looking back today. But what is that? Why do you think they were using that phraseology there?
Well, prior to being a teenager, you know, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. And somehow or another, the police learned about that. And all of my interactions with them, which was over a period of 6 weeks. It wasn't just the day of the coerced false confession. There's a 6-week run up to that, in which I interact and speak with them 2 or 3 times a week. And all of my interactions with them had the dynamic that they start out questioning me like a suspect, and when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, then they would switch it up. And Jeff, as this junior detective, helper theme was developed, and they would say things like, you know, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. So let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. And they would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinions were correct. You know, they made me feel important. I think that, as I mentioned before, that my father was never involved in my life in any aspect. That intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, otherwise known as Mutt and Jeff, in which one officer is aggressive as the bad cop and the other one pretends to be a friend. So I began looking up to him as a father figure. But the last point I want to quickly make here as I wrap up this answer is that the basis of all of my answers is information that they've already previously gave me. They told me what path they thought that she took. They asked me, well, what type of keychain do you think that she had? Her keys were missing. So that lets me know the keys were missing. They took me to the crime scene at night, where a detective other than the one that you heard, you know, is pointing out to me, yeah, well, her body was found here, and, you know, seems like there's a struggle here. So they're telling me all these different things, and I'm just regurgitating back what they've already said to me. And last thing, I mean, they're encouraging me to try to think and act like them, and I'm trying to do that to the extent that a 16-year-old could do it.
You know, in the filmmaking process, I took Jeff back to the scene of the crime and filmed him so he could show me where it was. He could not find it. We wandered around, and he was scratching his head, and he was like, maybe it was here, maybe it was there, I don't know, maybe it was... He had no idea.
I know we've got a lot of forward-thinking investigators in the room, evidence-based interviewing, and some of the stuff you're hearing, hopefully you're thinking like, obviously that's a problem, right? I would never do that. I think the one thing that still trickles into every interview is what Jeff just described, contamination.
Right.
And that's where we, you know, sometimes intentionally, Jeff, what you just described, I mean, bringing you to the crime scene, showing you photos, but sometimes even unintentionally, we're revealing details about an incident or a crime, and people are regurgitating those. What I think is interesting is recording, right? So if the interview is fully recorded, you have the ability as the investigator or your defense attorney to go back and see when that information was released. I know a lot of you are not fully recording your conversations, and so it can be difficult to go back and track that information release. But Jeff, how much would you say of your interactions with law enforcement was recorded versus what the police just reported?
I think they recorded maybe 35% of it, and 0% of it on the day of the coerced false confession.
So at the end of the day, and we're going to listen to a false confession expert here in the next clip, what's terrifying is when a jury or a judge listens to a confession, they might just hear this very detailed statement that appears this must be true and reliable. How else would he know about it until you just listened to your answer you just gave?
And I just want to quickly mention when, as a result of the interrogation not being recorded, when the cops came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their story.
Right, so it's just your word at that point, or you and your attorney's word.
Well, it wasn't even my word because I wanted to testify at the pre-trial hearing, but my lawyer said no because I haven't decided if you're going to testify at the trial yet, and therefore, if I put you on the stand, nobody ever tells the same story twice, and if there's any variation in your testimony from the pre-trial hearing compared to the trial testimony, well, then the prosecutor could use that discrepancy and try to make it appear as though you were lying, even though you weren't. But then when I got to the trial, he wouldn't let me testify there either. You know, he told me that it wasn't his job to prove that I was innocent, that it was up to the prosecution to prove that I was guilty, and he didn't think that that happened. And, you know, that's a very naive way to practice law. In reality, if a jury hears that a defendant has confessed, there's a significant risk of a conviction. So you have to answer that confession. You have to explain that confession. You got to disprove that confession, bring it all together in your closing arguments, you know, to the jury. But he never did that. Sometimes he told the jury that I never confessed at all. Other times he argued that I did confess, but that it was a coerced confession. At still other times, he argued that it was a false confession. So he took an approach of just throwing mud against the wall. You know, he never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball with when the crime happened. And the last point I'll make is that he wouldn't even let me tell him what happened. Every time, he rarely met with me, just in general, but then when I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. I still remember when he said, I don't care if you're guilty or innocent.
As you're talking, I'm just hearing a commonality between your voice was not heard in the courtroom, to your own attorney, or in the interrogation room.
Correct.
I'm going to play this clip that kind of restates some of the pieces of the interrogation itself, but this is going to highlight some expertise from a false confession expert as well.
There was misconduct by every person involved in Jeff's case. Once they started talking to him, you know, it became crystal clear that the only thing he was interested in doing is spending time with these police officers who were father figures or big brothers, who were treating him well, who were pretending to take him seriously, pretending to take his theories seriously, when in fact all they were trying to do was to get him to confess.
I'm Matthew Barry Johnson. I'm a professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Murders that are committed by strangers present special challenges, and those special challenges may cause law enforcement to act hastily in the investigation and or cut corners in many ways in the investigation. And as a result, you have these criminal investigative failures or wrongful convictions. Law enforcement officers will try to take the suspect into an environment, a physical environment, where the police dominate and control the atmosphere. So the person is removed from things they're familiar with, as well as people that they're familiar with.
In Jeff's case especially, he was a juvenile. So he was a juvenile with no parent, with no lawyer present. They interrogated him for over 8 hours. They did not give him food. They pumped him full of coffee. There's
a term, interrogation-induced cognitive decline. This has an impact on people's ability to think and reason, to problem solve. Many people will say, I would never do it. You really don't know unless you've been through that type of an ordeal. 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 to 3 hours, and most of us have a point at which we would just have deteriorated and give up.
They, played so many mind games with him. They said, you failed the polygraph. Your body has already told us from within you that you did it. Now we need to hear it from your words.
Deskovic said he was so fiercely interrogated that he feared for his life. The jury found Stevens guilty of making up evidence, coercing a confession, and malicious prosecution. The jury did decide on a $40 million settlement.
But I'm going to go back from a filmmaking perspective. So I'm seeing you've got, your expert, first of all. I'm curious how you find an expert. But then second, how do you decide where you're going to interview people? I saw somebody's on the street, it looks like sidewalk or stairs behind them. How do you decide the location and who you're going to bring into the film?
Well, it's a documentary, so really whatever's available, like on the street, that was her house. It was just on the stoop of her house. It was COVID time, so we couldn't go inside. So it was just, what we had available to us. And the false confession expert, he came in from out of town, so I had to rent an office space, and we filmed in that little conference room. But yeah, as a documentarian, you're truly just documenting real life. So it could be here, it could be anywhere. Yeah.
How did you find the expert?
Jeff gave me some names. I reached out to Saul first. What's his last name?
Saul Casson, who spoke at Elite Training Day a few years ago.
Yes, and we tried, but it was COVID times, and he was very busy, and so he couldn't do it. And then Jeff introduced me to Matthew.
I just want to quickly add that, prior to the project, Matthew Johnson had wrote a scholarly paper called Two Recently Confirmed False Confessions, Byron Halsey and Jeffrey Deskovic.
So when you are talking to an expert and you're learning, because it's 16 years old and even most people have no idea the false confession research exists, right? And you're experiencing this for the first time. Was there a moment where you felt, I'm not alone? Like there's research out there, there's other cases that sound similar to mine. And what was that experience like?
Yeah, that was when I started doing a lot of informal learning on my own. That was post-exoneration, but before I went to grad school. I have a master's degree. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction causes, and I actually took Matthew Johnson, by the way, as a professor in an interrogation class. So he later told me he found that to be challenging to have me in the class because I did a lot of class participation. Yeah, but it did help to learn that I wasn't the only one out there, and to learn the commonalities, and I did that through scholarly papers. But also I read. I think I ultimately wound up reading all the Innocence Project has a website with the DNA exonerations in it, and I read all of them because I was in the field just as an advocate, and I figured, well, first of all, I want to know more beyond just my own case, but also knowing the case summaries. If I could know the route that people took in order to get exonerated, then that certainly puts me in a position to consult on cases and just vetting cases, and that was still relevant to me even just as an individual advocate, because people would reach out to me and ask me to support this case or that case, and so I'd want to review and vet a case. I didn't want to just throw my name behind just anything. But also I was a columnist for a weekly paper myself for 5 years, and I wrote some articles about wrongful conviction cases while the injustice was still afoot, and I wanted to make sure that I have a knowledge base to compare the case. And a bunch of those cases that I wrote about, by the way, people later turned out to be exonerated, including a false confession case. Actually, two of them, Frank Sterling and Marty Tankleff.
It's powerful work that you're doing now, which I want to get into as well. Matt Johnson talked about isolation, right? And one of the things you often see in false confession cases is where somebody feels alone, they're away from their comfortable environment. And there's a couple of questions in here about where was your either parent or a guardian or legal representation? What did that look like? Because you probably never felt like you needed one, but what was that experience like, and where were they, and when did they find out about what was going on?
Yeah, I didn't have a parent present. I told my mother after the first interaction with the cops, and she told me she didn't want me to have anything else to do with them, but she didn't really explain why. I didn't understand why. I had always been raised, the cops are your friend, they're there for your protection. And then on top of that, they're telling me that they need my help to solve the crime. I think the fact that I was 16 years old was a big factor. That's really the age where, kids are starting to push back on parental authority, and, you want your own identity. And of course, we all know better than what our parents do, even though in reality we don't. So there was that dynamic in play. So I want to mention that the cops knew that my mother didn't want me to interact with them, and so they concealed that. But as a 16-year-old, parental consent is not necessary in order for you to waive your rights and decide to speak to an attorney. Speak to the cops without an attorney present. I'll also mention that while adults have given coerced false confessions, particularly vulnerable populations are people with mental health issues and youth, of which I was a youth. And last thing I'll say is that the innocence of suspects often works against them. So an innocent person would think, well, I didn't commit the crime. I also don't know anything about it. So, you know, why can't I waive my rights and speak to the police? What could possibly happen? You know, but quite a bit. Every time they got to that portion of the Miranda warnings where they said anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, I never understood what that meant. You know, my mind went to what I previously saw on television and different civil court contexts, and I would think, court, what are you talking about? We're not going to court. You know, and you know, in terms of the techniques that, you know, Dr. Johnson was speaking about, I mean, I could identify some of those techniques that happened in my interrogation. I mean, firstly, putting somebody in an unfamiliar environment that the cops dominate, that certainly was done. Cutting them off from friends and family and morale. Maximization, you know, and minimization. You know, maximization, of course, we emphasize what the penalty is, and, you know, they try to make it sound, well, first let me go to minimization. They try to make it sound, minimization is when law enforcement tries to make it sound like they minimize the culpability, that it's understandable, right? And things that are understandable aren't punished, right? And then, you know, the other end of it, you know, maximization, well, look, this is your chance to, you know, tell us really what happened. You know, there's people that premeditate things and, you know, these are really, really bad criminals. I don't think that that's how you are. I think it's, and then throw out a scenario and try to get you to latch on to that. So those dynamics were certainly in play. Another one, don't even, just continue on with the interrogation as if a denial hasn't even been verbalized. So in the course of being interrogated by the polygraphist, every time I said that I was innocent, I didn't do it, I mean, he kept on going almost as if I didn't say anything. So that was utilized. There were times where I'm about to, you know, deny again and just over talking me, not even letting me get a denial out.
Thank you for sharing all that, because what's really powerful is we've had, especially this group, right? We've had academics come out and talk about, we've got some tomorrow, talking about what the research says and what they found in either field studies or in lab studies, and we could put it in curriculum, but it's different when you experience it, right? We can talk about, I think, the maximization, minimization, especially those of you, if you have kids, hopefully you're imagining this scenario, this risk versus benefit kind of analysis that somebody's doing. And so if you could put yourself back in that mindset, if your decision was, I'm not going to confess and not cooperate, what was the outcome you felt like was going to happen then?
Well, it reached a point that eventually I was in fear of my life. I mean, towards the end, because the fact that they weren't slowing down, that if anything, the intensity was ratcheting up. And then I started focusing, and by now we're talking about hours 6.5 and 7, just to be clear. You know, the fact that I don't know where I am and that nobody else knows where I am, that dawns on me. And that happened to be the very point that the cop pretending to be my friend hit on. When he said, look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do so any longer. I mean, so with that argument, he pushed me over the top. Mm-hmm. I can't do this any longer. You got to help yourself. And then he opens the door clear for me to walk through by the false promise that I'm not going to be arrested. They're going to stop. I can go home afterwards.
If that didn't hit you yet, I'm going to play one last clip that it's emotional, and I appreciate Jeff for letting us share this and for Jia for capturing it.
People confess for a variety of reasons. Most people have no idea what it would feel like to be in a room with interrogators telling you that you can't leave until you admit to doing something.
The officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he'd been holding them off, but couldn't do so any longer. By the time it was all said and done, I was curled up into a fetal position on the floor.
And how did you believe that if you confessed to it, you would get to go home?
Because I was desperate, and because I was 16, and I mean, this false promise was the only thing that I had to hold on to get to the place mentally where I thought that everything would be okay. And just in my desperation in the moment, I didn't see any other way to continue either.
full time. That's the shoot to get stuff. The kids over there, that's the basketball court.
Right. Yeah, so there's people on that path all the time. The dirt path that you took me on where you said the rape and the body were, now that's much less used. Why do you feel the person would do the rape at this point, which, let's say there's A, B, and C, struggle, rape, body. Why after the rape do you feel that the person responsible then drag the body to a different point?
And then make it hard for people to find because supposedly they out of bumps up there.
And you said from there she was dragged down to where you indicate the body would probably be found. Again, it's only your opinion. But why do you think she died at the point of the rape and then was dragged to a different point to be covered up?
I could keep listening, but I don't think there's a lot of point. I have some thoughts in my head just from listening. I would like to get everything in my head out real quick. What? He's allowed to have an opinion, but I can't? My opinion is indication of the guilt? Well, why aren't his thoughts looked at as an indication of guilt? What is it? That would be ridiculous because he's a cop and I'm not? But I'm a 16-year-old brought into the case by the cops on a ruse, pretending like they needed my help to solve the crime. So I'm thinking and acting like them to the limited extent that I can as a 16-year-old, encouraged by their words. He's asking me opinion questions and saying to me, this is only your opinion, right? And I'm not locking you in. He's saying all of that. And then even in that short clip, he started and stopped the tape. There's a pause. If it's all on the up and up, why are you starting and stopping the tape? And that happened throughout the whole 6 weeks. A lot of times things were not recorded, but when they were, it was sporadic. And there was a lot of stopping and starting the tape. This is my first time listening to this tape other than 26, 27 years ago while I was in court. Knowing what I know now, what stands out to me about this audio is that the basis of my statements in this audio clip should have been something that my lawyer elicited from me on the stand. He should have put me on the witness stand and played this whole tape, start and stop the tape then in the court. Okay, you just said this here. Why did you say that? This whole wrongful conviction could have and should have been avoided. I believe a really great second or third year law student who just graduated, doesn't even have the law license, with zero experience in the court, I think could have done a better job than him, could have won this case. I mean, there's two things about this case. Play up the DNA, explain it, utilize it, and attack the confession. Who wouldn't know how to do that? Anybody could have won this case. You know, I did not have to lose this case. I was innocent. I didn't have to lose this case. I didn't have to go to prison for 16 years. I didn't have to be there from 17 to 32. I didn't.
actually sitting here in the chair and I'm out and all this stuff is done and I'm exonerated, or am I like in the prison someplace and I'm just in my mind and I'm still there and none of this stuff like ever happened? I'm not exonerated, I'm still inside, and I just lost the mind, and that's all. And maybe I'm just in my own delusions because I can't deal with being in the cell. I don't know where any of this stuff is happening right now, or if it's.
Thank you for letting us share that.
Sure.
And thank you for capturing it. I knew we'd see you on the film at some point. So Jia, what's going through your mind during that?
So many things. One, that was the one and only time I questioned if I should quit and not make films, because it was opposite of my intention to help people and raise awareness. And I thought, well, I'm re-traumatizing somebody, and that's the complete opposite of what I set out to do. And I really questioned that I'm not cut out for this, and this was the wrong decision. And I'll just paint the picture in the room. It was just me and a cameraman. And the cameraman was a big guy, 6 feet, broad, and Jeff. And that happened. I wasn't expecting it at all. I had no idea what to do. I felt guilt-ridden, and I didn't go to him right away because he asked me not to, and then I did, as you saw. And then he wasn't present anymore. He really thought that he might be in a cell and imagining me. And he asked me if I was like a figment of his imagination. And I didn't know what to do in that moment. I turned to the cameraman because I was like, I just need help. Just anybody. And he was bawling. And I was like, okay, I'm on my own here. And I just talked to Jeff, and I started to say things like, no, we went on this trip together, or we were in Atlanta, remember, at the film festival. And I was just trying to give him examples of real life things that had occurred between us over the last few years. And then there was a balcony in the studio, thank God. We went outside, got some fresh air, and Jeff realized that everything was okay. And right away I said to him, and I was trying not to cry myself, and I said to him right away, I said, this never will see the light of day. We never have to put it in the film. I'll just delete it. Don't even worry about it. And he said to me right in that moment, he said, no, it has to go in the film. You have to put it in, because if people can't watch what they did to me, then what did I go through it for? And that's why it's in the film, because I would have never put it in there had Jeff not wanted it in there. So that it was a really, really crazy experience. And this is what I was referencing earlier when I said I should have had a trauma therapist, because definitely I was not the right person to help Jeff through that event.
What you want to expand on that, Jeff? And because I think that's just so powerful that when Jia shared that with you and you said, this is still important for me to put in there, what was going through your mind?
I wanted to reach people, and I think that removing that would kind of sanitize the film. And that's not what I'm about. I want it to be out there, as dramatic as it can be, because it was extremely traumatic in a way that's much more that can ever be captured on film. So to the extent we can capture anything, even just a glimmer or a glimpse or something in that direction, we're not gonna delete that. So
that's in that moment, how did you have that awareness when you were just coming through this, psychological incident? I found that to be pretty remarkable.
Just kind of, I can relate that even to that scene, because once you made it clear to me that, it was real, that I was really free, I was exonerated, that you were real, that we were filming, and once I was grounded back into reality, because the trauma of it knocked me off of that perch, but my wits were back about me some, and I just, maybe the last thing I'll say, that's true what I said, but I want to also add that I think instinctively I felt like that was going to help make the documentary, really grip people, and that's what I want to do. I want the film to be, a catalyst for legislation that prevents wrongful convictions caused by coerced false confessions. I want to reduce wrongful convictions, period, whether false confession caused or not. And my story, the nonprofit entity that we'll get to a little bit after, all those things can benefit, by the film being as successful as it can. And I feel like having that moment. That to me is the most dramatic, effective moment out of the whole effective 90 minutes of the film. And no way did I want that to be taken out. So I, gave that opinion, and, ultimately Jia decided to keep it in because, just to be since you're asking Jia questions regarding, the filmmaking and the behind the scenes aspect of it, I'll speak to one thing. I had this much creative control over the documentary. I had zero to do with it, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and she didn't offer that. So that was the one time that, I did express that I wanted something to stay in. And even then, it was up to her. I don't think the documentary could be effective the other way.
Yeah, I think everybody in the room felt the power behind that scene and that message. I want to talk about a little bit about re-entry and what that looks like and what you're doing now. But about the film first, what does this process look like? So you put together this film and it's done, but now it doesn't just show up on Netflix. So as much as you can share, what's the process look like from I created this film and now I hope somebody watches it?
Yeah, it's such a long journey. It takes years. It actually started by doing a whole bunch of screenings like this, all over the place. And through that, I got signed with an agency, Buckwald, and they are the ones who work with the streaming platforms, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, to sell the film. And that's the process we're in right now. So there's a few streamers who are considering it currently, and we're waiting for them to get back to us. And then whoever wants it, we can decide who we give it to, and that's how it gets out there. But less than 1% of films ever make it to a streaming platform. So it's real challenge. Yeah.
Well, it's congrats on where you're at this point.
Thank you.
And you all get to say, when you're watching it on your couch, or wherever it ends up, you get to say you saw it here first. When a lot of people think about what happens either post-conviction or when somebody serves to the extent of their sentence, there's a difference between somebody who's exonerated, re-entering society, versus maybe somebody who's served time and then has more support as they go into the community. Can you explain that, Jeff?
Sure. When people are released on parole, there's re-entry help. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations that focus in on that, and then the parole officer, at least in theory, is supposed to be providing some re-entry services, directing, connecting to resources. And in contrast to that, there is nothing for exonerees. You're just released with nothing. You are in most states. 11 states don't compensate, one of them being Pennsylvania that doesn't, which we're working on. But most states do compensate, but there's nothing between point A when you're released and point B. You have to file a lawsuit, and that takes a process. And, it took me 5 years. So briefly, I'll just say that, in terms of the mental health aspect of it, I saw mental health professionals 4 times a week for 6 years, just in dealing with the psychological after effects and trying to readjust to being free. The world was different. So technology was different. GPS, cell phones, internet hadn't been created. Culture was different. Cities and towns looked different physically in terms of buildings and other structures. So those 3 elements made it feel like I was in a parallel world, a world that I didn't belong in. Whenever I would meet up with my extended family, that would be awkward because the overwhelming majority of them never came to see me in prison, and the few that did, it was many years in between visits. So I knew who they were intellectually, but I was a different person now, and so were they. I was always passed over for gainful employment. It seemed like every would-be employer wanted somebody with job experience, which obviously I couldn't provide, as well as, references. I needed somebody that would be patient and offer a little bit of on-the-job training. So as a result of that, I didn't have very much money coming in. I was making money speaking, but that's not a consistent form of income. I was a weekly columnist, but it was a weekly paper, so you wanted 1 article a week. So I didn't have very much money coming in, and so I lacked stability of housing. I bounced around from place to place. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. And lastly, it was very lonely. So the reentry process was extremely difficult as well. And, that's typical.
I think that was new to me when I kind of got into this space and learning that, a lot of people, we see a documentary and you assume that everybody who's wrongfully convicted walks away with millions and millions of dollars. And we've learned that that's not the case. And the amount of support is not always there. And so I know you just illustrated this, but I've heard so many stories of people 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, that don't have an email address, don't have a credit score, don't have job history or work experience, and their social support is also gone. So you're kind of starting fresh. It's like time froze.
Right, and I want to add that I think that as something that's provided to exonerees immediately as something separate and apart from compensation, there should be on day one, automatic, there should be housing, cost of living, mental health services, doctor and dental care, access to public transportation, job training, job placement, classes on technology.
There's a few questions that came in asking about some of the other parties that were involved. So there's a failure in a lot of people here, it seems like, from your attorney to the prosecutor to the judge to the investigators for the film. Did anybody either engage with you guys, any of those other parties involved in the case, or did you make a decision to try to include or not include those voices?
No, we didn't. The one detective, and this is mentioned in the film, if you see the whole film, he still goes around saying Jeff is guilty. And he says the only person wrongfully convicted is Stephen Cunningham, who was the actual murderer. And you know, what's really interesting, I was gonna say this on the last clip you saw, the woman at the very beginning who says, I didn't know anybody could confess until I learned of the Central Park Five and things like that. She was a reporter, and she was a really young reporter, and she was in the courtroom when Jeff was convicted. And she wrote many articles about his guilt. And she came on the film, and I really loved her for doing that, because I've seen time and time again, it's just human nature to never admit wrong, even when there's just glaring evidence like DNA proving Jeff's innocence. People just want to be married to the thing that they said that one time because they can't admit that they were wrong and just say, sorry, and I messed up and I'm human. And it's a bizarre human trait that so many people have. And I really, really respected Deborah for coming on and saying that was wrong what I wrote, and now I believe, you know?
Speaking of similar, have you engaged with your attorney?
No, no. I mean, when you file a lawsuit against people, and you know, my lawyer was one of the defendants in the 1983 federal civil rights lawsuit. When you file a lawsuit, you're not supposed to talk or interact with them.
So you mentioned the actual person who got the actual guilty
Perpetrator?
person. Yeah. So explain that. So the actual person was caught, DNA matched, and what other, if any, hypothetically, crimes did they commit in the meantime?
Sure. So the DNA matched him, and then as a result of that, you know, he was, they questioned him, and you know, he initially tried to deny, and they confronted him with the DNA evidence, and he admitted that he was the person that committed the crime. I want to quickly mention that he also admitted it to a reporter on video camera. So just to be clear, there's no coerced false confession there. So he killed a second victim just 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case. In my case, he killed a school teacher who had 2 children. So had the police done their work right, you know, he could have been arrested and in prison. He wouldn't have been free to kill a second victim.
Can I just add to that too, Jeff? So there was semen, you know, because she was raped. And so there was DNA that obviously could have been tested, didn't match Jeff. And while he was incarcerated, he kept requesting for this DNA to be tested and was denied every time. And had the DA at the time said yes to that retesting, he could have saved almost 10 years off of the time that he served, but they denied it every time. It just goes again to, like, why not? Why can't we look at things with a fresh set of eyes, especially something that like this that's so black and white?
Jeff, there's a few questions about the 16 years and what kept you motivated or hopeful, or what was that like day to day for you?
So I would describe it as a nonstop obstacle course featuring the guards, the prisoners, and the civilians as obstacles to the main goal, which was to, you know, regain your freedom, overturn the conviction and regain your freedom. In terms of what kept me going, it was many things at the same time. Belief in God was one thing. Second thing, you know, I just kind of lived from appeal to appeal. I thought I just had to hold on for another year or two for the next appeal, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still naively believed in the system. I used to go to the law library and learn the law because I didn't trust lawyers to defend me anymore. And that gave me a sense of comfort and empowerment. I used to collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and you know, that gave me inspiration to keep going. There was a pen pal that showed up in my last year of imprisonment, and I think he showed up in the nick of time. I mean, I was openly asking the stranger that I didn't know from a can of paint should I quit? Should I give up? Should I just commit suicide? I'm never going to get out of here. There was another prisoner there named Frank Sterling who was also innocent, and we used to get together once every 6 years for a period of about 12 years, and half the conversation would be how to keep going morale-wise, and the other half the conversation would pertain to like a brainstorm session about what the next move was to make, the next letter. Frank was exonerated by DNA a couple of years after me. I wasn't just naively believing he was innocent just because I happened to be. I think the utilization of the term leaves me, but so when you're in an extreme situation, the mind suppresses things sometimes. So the utilization of delusion. So like in Mankind's Search for Meaning, that Viktor Frankl talks about that. So when I played basketball or I played chess or I was playing ping pong and I had this elaborate delusion going on, like I was a professional player and so was everybody else. And, but it wasn't like kids fooling around on a playground someplace. I mean, I needed to leave the prison for a couple of hours. And it's not my prison assignment in the morning or my prison assignment in the afternoon. I'm going to school, I'm going to work. It's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent.
Can you share what you shared with me, if you remember? You said that you really considered suicide, but then the reason you actually decided not to?
Yeah, sure. So let me say that I mean, I had to keep, throughout my incarceration, I had to keep fighting off the feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. They were the most intense in my last year because my appeals had been exhausted after 11 years. I wrote letters for 4 years, not getting any responses, trying to get someone to take my case pro bono so that they could try to find some new evidence which is the only way I could get back into court. And then I went to the parole board where, because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and take responsibility, I was denied parole. So it looked like I was going to die in prison. So I thought about suicide the most intensely in that last year, although I did have the intermittent thoughts. And you're right that the primary reason why I didn't act on it, it was this peculiar line of reasoning that I came upon. I thought that, well, what if even this doesn't go right? Now I'm still wrongfully imprisoned, but I went from bad to worse because, now maybe I'm brain damaged. If I chose to stock up on medications that I finagled out of the, mental health, the medical staff, what if I'm brain damaged? What if my attempt to, hang up? What if I just get a broken neck and now I'm a paraplegic who's wrongfully imprisoned? So that was the only reason at times where I didn't, despite everything else that I mentioned to you.
We got just a couple minutes left, so I just got a few last questions. Jia, a question came in about your work. Where can either people find more information about what you have done, and then do you wish to continue to make films like this?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm already working on another one. All of my work is on my site. It's just myfullname.com. And actually, if you do want to sign up for the newsletter, we send out all the invites for all the screenings. We have one coming up in Baltimore, one in New York, and we are in talks with a theater in Chicago. So hopefully in the near future, you're all welcome to come. And yes, the only thing I want to work on is wrongful conviction docs. I've actually working on two others. I'm working on one about that old show, Yo MTV Raps, that used to be on MTV, and I'm working on another one about the Golden State Warriors going into San Quentin prison to play against prisoners as rehabilitation, and it's been fascinating. And those two projects came to me as a result of people seeing the film that I did about Jeff. So I am working on those, but those are not my films.
And what else is happening at San Quentin prison soon?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, next week. So 16 years was official selection at San Quentin Prison. So not only are we going there next week, but the film is playing at the film festival. And it's going to play within all of the California prisons on the televisions that the prisoners watch for a month. So they'll all have access to it, which is pretty interesting. What was an honor for me is that the judges that chose the films were the prisoners. So it made me feel good that they thought this was representative of their experience, or that they thought it was, good.
The last question I want to ask is for Jeff, is to talk about the work you're doing now, because I think it's really important, not just the work, but it's just such a powerful movement for you what you're doing. So share a little bit about what you're doing now and how people can learn more about it.
Sure. So after I was exonerated, I was an individual advocate for about 5 years. I was speaking, I was writing, I was meeting with elected officials, I was trading privacy for awareness by doing media interviews, hoping that would move the needle on the policy stuff. And at the same time, I was doing that at the same time period as the difficulties we talked about in the reintegrative side. I did use some of the money to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which, we've been able to help free 15 people. We helped pass 9 policy changes in the legislature, most of it with the National Coalition Group It Could Happen to You, which I'm an advisory board member of. And after a while, I got tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments. So I took a second stab at getting into law school, and I got in this time. And so I did graduate law school. I am an attorney. I've overturned a few wrongful conviction cases as an attorney, including one that was an exoneration. My ultimate dream is to have a chapter of the Deskovic Foundation in each state and ultimately each country, because I really see this as a worldwide issue. In countries where we're not hearing about anyone being exonerated, it's not that the justice system is getting it right every time. It's that nobody's being exonerated. So that's my purpose in the world. That's my dream. That's my aspiration. The website is www.deskovic.org. Please follow us on Instagram, Deskovic Foundation, other social media, Facebook. And look, if you enjoyed what you saw today, there is the YouTube channel as well, Deskovic Foundation. So plenty of news interviews, presentations that I've given, some legislative testimony, other events where I've just simply been a panelist. So there's lots of other content out there. And look, last thing I'll say is, it's not free to do these cases. I work 50 or 60 hours a week pro bono. On that, I'm fine with that. I have whatever I do, but I have to have a team behind me. And I wanted to say that while we have 13 active cases, we're beyond our capacity at this point. We're overcommitted. So if we want to try to work on freeing still more innocent people, I need to add people to the team. What if there was 25,000 people that were willing to sacrifice $3 to $5 a month on a recurring monthly basis? That would give us close to $1 million, and we could hire those additional personnel to then work on freeing even more people than the limit where we're at right now.
Within the show notes, Jeff, we'll put all of your websites and Jia, yours as well. So if you all want to learn more about it, we'll have those easy for you to click, find, and support. I just want to thank you both. Thanks, Jeff, for, again, reliving this with us and sharing your voice. And thanks, Jia, for amplifying it through the film. And thank you all for being part of our first live Truth Be Told podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, everyone. Before you go, if you found value in today's episode, do us a favor. Follow, rate, and share Truth Be Told. Your support helps us keep bringing you real conversations from investigators, communicators, and people whose stories remind us why the truth really matters. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't miss the next episode of Truth Be Told. To help more listeners find our show, please provide us a rating, give us a follow, and share this episode with your colleagues. For the latest news and to engage with our guests, follow Truth Be Told on your favorite social media apps. And don't forget, we are available on all major platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and watch a video of this episode on YouTube. On behalf of our guests and valued sponsors, thanks again for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.